Good evening. Welcome to the Never Ending Glory Story. We can't make this stuff up. I'm Julie Mason, and this is Stuart White.
Hi, Julia. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm just really excited about the book, your book that you completed,
That's the book.
South Wind Rising. And you finished it, and it was published. It's a beautiful book. And why don't you tell us about the origin of the book, Stuart?
It started out like this. The most famous book, all right, the first famous book of what's called Civil War alternative history, How Might It Have Gone Differently, is called If the South Had Won the Civil War, from around 1960-61 by McKinley Cantor. And he was a novelist, so he used a lot of imagination in the things that he said. And when I read his book, I was obviously it's a very good read, but there were two big things I disagreed with him on. So just to get that out of my system, I opened up my computer and I typed out my disagreements, and that was about 250 words. So I was satisfied. I said, okay, fine, and I'm done with it. But I couldn't stop thinking, all right, if I disagreed with him on those, what would have been more likely things to have happened? So I went back to my computer and wrote out what I thought was more plausible happenings. So I was satisfied with that. But I still couldn't stop thinking about it and went back to my computer and said, all right, so in the decades following the war, if the South had won, how would that have gone differently? How would those developments going up to, say, 1900 have been? So I got some more words out of that. And then I said, well, if I'm this deep into it, why not go ahead and make it a book? And I packed in a bunch of background information on the early part of the Civil War, because when McKinley Cantor was writing, it was the Civil War centennial, and he probably expected the average person who read his book was going to know a lot about the war and know the names of some of the generals and the battles. But I can't make that assumption. This book is I intended for a general audience. So I wrote all of this background of how the first year or so of the war went, leading up to the parts I have being different. And at that point, I said, well, I could turn this into a book. It's got enough words now. So I went out to the internet and I got an illustrator, because McKinley Cantor has black and white illustrations in his book. I got some black and white illustrations for mine. And I got a couple of map makers, because you can't understand the flow of a battle without maps. So I got those on the internet, and they're all named on the title page. They did really good work for me. And found a publisher, Gatekeeper Press in Tampa, and they handled everything. Got the book, the virtual edition, out on Amazon, and the physical copy is also available through Amazon. And that's how I ended up here.
I absolutely love the book, and I love the cover
Thank you.
of it. And I think the illustrations look very cool on the inside. Someday I would love to see it in like a graphic novel for a younger generation.
That I would like to give that a try. Yes, I think that would work.
Yeah, you'd have to write dialogue, but it would be really cool.
Yes.
I mean, you could have the generals talking to each other.
I don't know that I have the imagination McKinley Cantor did, but I would have to give it a try.
I think you could do it. You're pretty brilliant. So, all right. So I've got some questions for you about the book. Okay, so you said that you had two big disagreements with Cantor.
Yes. The first one is he depicts the end of slavery in an independent South as being the result of a moral awakening. And that made absolutely no sense to me. You have to understand a lot of people today insist that slavery was really no big deal in the Old South. But as the historian Gary W. Gallagher, who's a very prolific historian, as he points out, that's all stuff people have been saying since the war. The people who took the southern states out of the Union back then were in no doubt that slavery was central to why they were doing it. It was part of their system. So I don't think when slavery eventually had to die out in an independent Confederacy, I think it would have been pretty painful. And I depict that in the book. And as part of that, McKinley Cantor makes the two American countries, he implies that they would industrialize at sort of the same rate moving on. And that's absolutely not right. The South, they were quite committed to their agrarian culture and they looked down on the factories of the North. So I think he was totally off base there. The second thing I disagree with him on is he has around 1960 when he was writing the the two independent countries, the Union and the Confederacy, and the Republic of Texas that in his book breaks off and becomes independent again. He has the three of them merging back into one nation. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous. The North and the South would have gone down such different paths. They would be two totally different places by the turn of the 20th century, and they could never have gotten back together again. And I explain how that works in the book.
Yeah, I'll give you a good job of that. Okay. So then we want to talk a little bit about Jefferson Davis.
Oh, yes. Because when we talked the other day, you mentioned Jefferson being interested in him.
I was really actually very interested in Robert E. Lee growing up.
Right. And there have been a lot of words written about Robert E. Lee. It's about Jefferson Davis. What I wanted to say is it's interesting that after the generation that fought the war started to fade a little bit, that's when they started naming highways and things. Like there's a Jefferson Davis Highway in Virginia after him. No one would have thought of doing that when the war ended. On the day of Appomattox, Jefferson Davis was the most hated man in the Confederacy. And I play a little on that in my book. That's why I say he would not have been commemorated at all. Davis he couldn't let bureaucratic trivia go. He felt he had to look at every piece of paper that crossed his desk and he had to sign it. He couldn't delegate things to his subordinates, which of course Abe Lincoln was very good at. But Davis's big problem was his personality. He he was he was warm in social and family settings, but he was very prickly with anyone who disagreed with him. And everything became a personal affront to him. I'm going to read you. Let me find my glasses because I've got the quote on my. Whoops. I have the quote right here. His own vice president, Alexander Stevens, called him a weak and vacillating, timid, petulant, peevish, and obstinate man.
Goodness.
And at one time or another, he was called, this is a mashup quote from various people, a little conceited, hypocritical, sniveling, canting, malicious, ambitious, dogged knave and fool.
Those are pretty harsh words, I'd say.
And his wife cut right to the heart of the matter when she said, if anyone disagrees with Mr. Davis, he resents it and describes the difference to the perversity of his opponent.
Wow.
So a lot of that was just Davis's personality. He turned everything into a personal battle, and Abe Lincoln didn't have that problem.
No.
Another thing, another reason why this, and Davis wasn't the only one who was caught up in this, is because there weren't any political parties in the South. There was no Republican Party at all, obviously. I believe, excuse me, of the 11 states that eventually made up the Confederacy, I think Abe Lincoln appeared on the ballot in one. Excuse me, Virginia. You couldn't even vote for Lincoln in the 10 other states. There was no Republican presence in the South. The Whigs had gone out of business, so the Democrats were the only party there. When you have only one party, and some totalitarian governments found this out in the 20th century, then you don't have a party, two competing parties mechanism to channel policy differences, and policy differences become personal. And I mentioned that quote by Alexander Stephens, the vice president. He really didn't care for Jefferson Davis. He eventually just gave up and moved back to his home in Georgia. That's and Davis, what has to be emphasized besides all of that is that he was absolutely rock solid dedicated to the Confederate cause. When the Union Army was closing in on Richmond, he got on a train with some of his cabinet officials, and they were headed down to North Carolina or Georgia or wherever, and they were going to carry on the Confederate government somewhere else. And that's at a time when the military situation had already disintegrated. But he worked long days, constantly, absolutely dedicated to the Confederate cause. But because he didn't have the warmth, he couldn't inspire the Southern people the way Abe Lincoln did the Northern people.
Yeah, Abe Lincoln was quite an orator.
He was, yes.
Has a lot of heart. If you think about how he grew up.
And he tolerated the abuse, just all kinds of verb. Well, both of them tolerated a lot of abuse. There's another difference. Lincoln had no problem putting newspaper editors in jail when they were getting in the way of the Union war effort. Jefferson Davis, for all of his pettiness and vindictiveness, he would not invoke the war powers he had to shut down newspapers that were just saying the most scurrilous things about it. He believed, let people say what they want.
He did. It's interesting how that sort of parallels with what we're dealing with now.
I hesitate to draw parallels between then and now because boy, that's a can of worms.
It is, but it's true. You know what I mean? You think about the media but think about how they were. I mean, we get everything in a nanosecond, and we have to watch horrible things online, on our phones. These guys had to, they had to wait for the newspaper to come.
And it would take weeks for news to arrive from a
Exactly.
distant battlefield, and rumors could go around before the truth got out. Yes, it was hard to know what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So, let's see. What about Robert E. Lee?
You hear a lot of people today. I'm going back to Gary Gallagher with this because he truly is an expert on this topic. He taught for a few years at Penn State, I think it was Penn State, and then moved to UVA where he was for a long time, has published all kinds of books. He reminds people that the Southern public would never have permitted their premier army to be commanded by a man who was soft on the slavery question. People because they see so much to admire in Lee today, they want to say, oh, well, he was against slavery. Well, no, he wasn't. He owned slaves. He was a man of his time.
Yeah. We were talking the other day about him because, you know, I liked our conversation when we were discussing how, these guys were fighting. They were in West Point together.
Right. There's a little squib right near the beginning of my book where I quote another essay that came out in the early 60s about the huge number of West Point graduates who led the armies. All the major battles had a West Point graduate on at least one of the two sides, and most of them, there was a West Point graduate on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, they knew each other by reputation. A lot of them had fought in the Mexican American War at the same time. So they knew who was across the battlefield from them. Yes.
Which would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Very knowing each other's quirks and knowing
Mm-hmm.
the stories about each other.
Right. I mean, they knew each other on a personal level. They lived with one another. Now they're fighting each other.
Right.
I mean, and I thought that it was interesting when we were talking because I actually loved reading biographies about Robert E. Lee when I was growing up. I mean, I read a lot of his biographies about him.
Well, he is an interesting man.
Yeah, he is. I mean, I was, against slavery. I'm from the North, right?
Of course.
And that's kind of in my blood a little bit. However, I've relatives that fought for the Confederates.
Right.
And so I had to sit there and think, what was it about Robert E. Lee that I was so intrigued by as a child? Why did I continue to read books about him? Apparently I thought he was very fascinating.
He certainly had integrity.
I think that's probably what it was because I'm reading about his character because these are biographies,
And
written for children.
he made a decision right at the end of the war when he was advised, and I can't remember the name of the general who was really for this. He said, let's send the men out into the countryside and we'll carry on a guerrilla action. And Lee said, absolutely not. That will tear the country apart. We gave it our best shot. We lost. Now let's make up. That, and the men would have done whatever Lee told them to do. And he knew that was the wrong thing. That one decision was crucial.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That would not have been a good look.
It would have been horrible for both the North and the South.
Right. Exactly. I mean, so I was looking at page 50. Sherman.
Yes, Billy Sherman.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, he's an interesting character too.
He is. He taught at a military academy in Louisiana, and he liked the Southern people, but he thought they were absolutely insane to go to war. And when the time came to fight, he fought, and he did what had. This is a touchy subject because Sherman is not beloved here in Georgia, where I live, as you can imagine. But
No, he
he
wouldn't
knew,
have been.
right? He knew the thing to do was to make the war so horrible that the South would stop fighting and get it over with.
Hmm. Very interesting. So I'm going to pull in a little bit of a little miracle here from
Okay.
my family history because your family is deep rooted in the South, right?
Yes, very.
And mine was too, actually. But okay, so This is a letter from my Uncle Tom, who is my dad's uncle.
Okay.
Okay. And he wrote, Dear Tom, your mom advised that you wished for information on the violin, and here goes. First of all, a little on Howell Cobb, who's from whose mansion the violin was taken. He was an important politician, served as a congressman from Georgia, Speaker of the U.S. House, Secretary of Treasury, and Buchanan's cabinet, and resigned when the war broke out. Very strong states' rightist and advocate of slavery. He was appointed brigadier general by the Confederate Congress and rose to become a major general. He was conspicuous at the Battle of Antietam. Antietam. Is that how I say it?
Antietam, that's right.
Thank you. Excuse me. The bloodiest conflict. One day of the war, as a leader of Cobb's Legion, he lived in Americus, Georgia, having purchased the estate and mansion of Willis Hawkins in early 1864. And by research, I verified that this mansion was destroyed by fire during Sherman's march to the sea. Its location at the corner of College and Lee in Americus. At the time, your great grandfather, Thomas McCracken, was a clerk in the cavalry division of General Kirkpatrick, and he strapped the violin to his saddle. And I close a copy of the now famous letter for your records. So what happened was he went in and he stole a violin out of a house.
Did it stay in the family, the violin?
Oh, we still have it's still in the family. We still have.
You still got it. Wow.
I think that would be my dad's so my dad's uncle, my great uncle, his son has it, I think.
How about that?
Yeah. Yeah, he still has it. So that's just kind of like an interesting twist in my family and how I have all the paperwork right here.
Those kinds of stories are truly fascinating. And your
Yeah.
family still has it.
He still has it. I told my dad, when my father read your book, by the way, and absolutely loved it.
Yes, I appreciate that.
And he wrote a review on Amazon.
You mentioned that your ancestor, McCracken, wasn't, fought under General Kilpatrick. He was renowned as being one of the most disliked, well, I think the most disliked officer in the whole Union Army to serve under. The nickname they gave him was Killed Cavalry because the cavalrymen who served under him universally hated it. So if he was able to survive serving for that officer, okay.
He's probably a tough cookie, huh?
I would think. What is this from Indiana, Illinois? Where was he? Which unit do you know?
Georgia.
No, which unit did McCracken serve in?
I don't know.
Under Kilpatrick.
I don't know.
Okay. We'll
have to discuss that another time. You can talk to my dad. Well,
I might be able to find that out.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just very interesting. My family, we've done my uncle Bruce has done, my dad's brother has done the genealogy, and it's fascinating.
And the internet makes it so much easier.
Yeah, it's fascinating to learn about, why sometimes why you may perhaps act the way you do. It comes down in your bloodline because, they're pretty much warriors.
If you could ever get, and we may be able to do this, to find online a copy of your ancestors' service record.
Oh.
The National Archives, all of those North and South became the property of the National Archives after the war, and they've all been photocopied. Well, they're on microfilm, and if you go to the right place, you can get them photocopied, and to see your ancestor's name, and then the flowing script of the company clerk and the date, and this sergeant of Company E was paid on this day, and then the notes. What's he been doing the last 2 months? Well, he was in hospital. He was on special duty. When you see it, it really comes alive then, and you realize,
Right. And I know that my uncle probably has already done that because I'm the one in the family that also likes genealogy and to know our family history and our roots. Um and he showed me our the work he had done on the ancestry.com, I think it was.
right, right.
And so I've seen a lot. I have a lot of notes. So all of that plays into, who we are. Like your family, you said, came from Scotland and Ireland and England, right?
Yes, both my mother's and my father's families. Yes,
And then they migrated down south.
they all either they landed in the South or they got down here eventually. Yes.
Isn't that interesting? How that would be in your blood?
Definitely ask your uncle if he has the service record.
Okay,
That's what you want to see.
I'll ask him. I'm fairly certain he does. I mean, I've seen some of the other documents he showed me. And how do you think your that ancestor that's inside your blood affected you and your writing of South Wind Rising?
Well, I've been reading about the Civil War since I was 10 and
Mhm.
have been off and on at times absolutely obsessed with it. So I can't help thinking that there's some genetic component there.
I think that there is. I mean, I definitely think there is. I mean, I remember my uncle Bruce, who I'm speaking of, when they lived in outside of Atlanta, and we went to visit them on the way down to Florida from Chicago because that's where I grew up in Chicago, and I was fascinated with the Civil War too. Um, and I remember in their backyard there was a wall, the slaves.
Wow.
Mhm.
What do you remember where in relation to the city of Atlanta this was?
I'd have to ask my uncle Bruce. He lives in Richmond, so when you and I go do some kind of book event in Richmond, we can
Def-
probably have him come visit us, and you can talk to him about it.
Definitely.
Yeah, because I remember being a little girl. I mean, I was always, since I was 5, I was in the library reading books. So, I was always on a little adventure in my brain or inside a book, and now I'm in the book business. So,
I know
um,
that feeling. Yes.
you know how that is.
Yeah.
So, I was so fascinated with the Civil War too. You
Well,
know,
the never-ending topic.
it really is, and I was fascinated with it. I mean, Harriet Tubman, I loved her. Um,
He had some guts.
Oh, she was called Moses,
Yeah.
I mean,
Went back over and over and over, taking a risk every time.
oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I actually did an event when I was in the book business, when I worked for my family business, which was based here in Indianapolis, but I was in Florida, and I worked with an author named Gwinnett Tilly Turner, and my mom had met her at a book convention in Illinois, and she wrote this book called An Apple for Harriet Tubman. And she walked up to my mom, and she's in the whole entire book convention in the state of Illinois. She walked up to my mom and said, "I want you to market my book." So my mom was like, and it was called An Apple for Harriet Tubman. My mom said that was my daughter's favorite person in history is Harriet Tubman,
Nice.
right? So she also wrote a book on Fort Mose in St. Augustine,
St. Augustine, right?
which is the first free black settlement
Right.
in the Revolutionary War.
Have you been to Fort Mose?
Oh, yes. See,
So
because
there is something left of it?
oh, it's beautiful, yeah. So Gwinnett wrote these books, okay? And so my mom sent me down the book, and I worked with Gwinnett and did a little book tour with her in St. Augustine and Clay County when I lived in Florida. So Harriet Tubman, she was a spy, a Civil War spy.
Yes. And that was a very risky undertaking.
But I think my favorite part of the Apple for Harriet Tubman book from Gwinnett Tilly Turner, who wrote this book about her, was that, remember when the slave owner threw the rock at her head? He threw a rock at her head for eating an apple.
Okay.
Well, it was like an iron, and he
Right.
split her head. She was in the apple orchard as a child, and she had to, pick the apples, and she was hungry, so she took a bite out of it, and the overseer saw her, and he whipped her, and he took this big, huge metal iron, and he threw it at her head and split her head open.
That was the reality.
Hmm. So what ended up happening was she developed a condition where, from that injury, where she would just like fall asleep, kind of like narcolepsy in a way.
Yeah.
Okay. But so she went back, and she would, bring after she was freed and ran away, she'd go back and get the other people. They called her Moses.
Right.
Okay. So what happened was, this is my favorite part. She's such a warrior. She was in Maryland, and she fell asleep. She had one of her episodes with her brain, and she fell asleep on a park bench in Maryland. And when she woke up, she looked up, and right above her head was a warrant out for her arrest, bounty for her head.
Wow. What a life.
What a life. So, the Civil War, we could talk about it forever. It's just a fascinating topic. And how do you think, do you want to talk about the progressivism and how it comes in?
Can I
What do you want to talk about now?
can we take a break? Is that possible?
Take a break?
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never done that. Hold on. Yes. Okay. So, at any rate, so now we're going to wrap up our conversation tonight. And I want to thank Stuart for coming on my podcast. And Stuart, how can we get a copy of your book?
It's on Amazon, South Wind Rising, an alternative outcome to the American Civil War. And you can get a physical copy if you want, but the online copy is half as much.
Oh, wonderful. So whichever way you prefer to read books, I like the physical copy. I've got mine here. I like the physical copy, but some people might like to read it on their electronic device. It's just easier on my eyes. But
Right.
anyway, it's been such a pleasure to have you on this evening. And Stuart and I have decided we're going to come back and do a part 2 episode to talk about how we feel that this ties into current.
Yes, the very last, say the last 10th of the book gets into some material that may rub some folks the wrong way.
That's okay. I've said this. I tell everybody this because I'm an honest, sort of straight shooting, authentic type. I mean, we are kind of in a war in our country right now. There is a little bit of quite a bit of a divide, and to me, it's unfortunate. However, we're still here.
That's right.
We're still a nation.
Yes.
And we just celebrated our 250th anniversary. So we should be very grateful we live in the land of the free and the brave.
I am very grateful.
Yeah, I love our country. I really do. Quite a patriot. So, anyway, it's been such a pleasure to have you on, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Julia.
Oh, thank you. All right. Okay. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody. Bye.